The bouquet of flowers was placed heavily on the table, making a loud noise. Dozens of red roses spilled across polished wood, their petals bright against the sterile boardroom light. For one dizzy second, I thought they were for me. After all, I had just pulled off the most complicated compliance mission in company history, securing approvals in 3 countries in under a week, saving us from millions in fines. Everyone whispered that a promotion was coming. My heart fluttered. This was it. Marcus Hale, our CEO, stood tall, his grin sharp as glass. "Congratulations," he boomed, his voice echoing off the high windows. Then he turned. Not to me, but to the young man slouched 2 chairs away. "Carter Rhodes, welcome as our new head of global operations. Effective immediately, Mia Rhodes is relieved of her duties." The words shattered inside me. 19 years of loyalty, erased in less than a breath. My name discarded in the same sentence as my title. Around the table, chairs shifted. A few board members averted their eyes. Not one applauded. The silence was almost crueler than the announcement itself. Carter leaned back, smirk tugging at his lips. He plucked a single rose from the bouquet, twirled it, then looked at me with mock sympathy. "Don't worry, Mia," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "I'll try not to break your little bridge system." A few nervous laughs escaped, hollow and forced. His arrogance filled the room like smoke. I stood frozen, humiliation burning through my chest. They all knew what I had sacrificed. I was the architect of the financial bridge protocol, the system that allowed billions to move seamlessly across 18 countries. Every transfer bore my design, my safeguards, my sleepless nights. I had skipped birthdays, ignored doctors' warnings, and worked through migraines to keep it flawless. That was the cost of keeping Marcus Hale's empire alive. And yet, here I was, replaced by a nephew whose only credential was his last name. Carter was 26, more familiar with nightclub VIP lists than with compliance law. He had once bragged about outsourcing a routine audit to a friend and nearly cost us a government contract. He was a joke in tailored suits. Marcus and I had always been opposites. He loved spectacle, grand gestures, magazine interviews, champagne toasts. He spoke in broad visions while ignoring the scaffolding that held them up. I thrived in the details, in the silent architecture of stability, where he chased recognition. I carried responsibility. Now, in this room of tall windows and polished glass, the imbalance was undeniable. My dedication had been met not with gratitude, but with betrayal. The empire I had built was being gifted to a man who hadn't earned it, in front of colleagues too afraid to challenge the charade. Their uneasy faces told me they knew the truth. Still, they said nothing, and in that suffocating silence, humiliation pressed down harder than any words Marcus Hale could have spoken. The sound of Carter's laughter still rang in my ears as I gathered my papers and rose from the table. Not one person stopped me. Not one voice called my name. The board members kept their eyes fixed on the agenda sheets in front of them, as if silence would shield them from guilt. I pushed my chair back slowly, deliberately, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me rush out in shame. My heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm steadier than my pulse. I kept my head high, but inside my chest, fury pressed like a storm behind a dam. The humiliation was fresh, raw, yet I swallowed it. Words of protest hovered on the tip of my tongue, but I forced them down. They would expect me to explode. They would expect a scene. No, I gave them nothing. My silence was sharper than any outburst, yet silence came at a cost. Each step toward the hallway sent a jolt through my body. Pain radiated beneath my ribs, the dull ache I had been ignoring for months. I remembered my doctor's warning only last week. "You're pushing too hard, Mia. This stress will worsen the condition. If you don't rest, treatment won't matter." I had nodded politely, then gone back to 12-hour days. What choice did I have? The system demanded me. The company depended on me. And the paycheck kept my treatments going. Without it, even survival felt uncertain. I had sacrificed everything for the financial bridge protocol. Nights of burning eyes in front of screens, mornings fueled only by bitter coffee, entire weekends lost inside server rooms while the rest of the world lived. My body had begged me to stop, but I had always bargained with it. Just one more project. Just one more quarter. Then I'll rest. 19 years of bargaining. And still I kept going. For what? For this betrayal. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. But before I could step inside, Carter's voice followed me down the hall. He was laughing, that smug, nasal laugh that made my skin crawl. "Don't worry, Aunt Mia," he called after me, loud enough for everyone lingering in the corridor to hear. "I'll babysit your little toy system. Try not to lose sleep over it." His words cut deeper than I expected. Babysit. As if the financial bridge protocol, the system I had built line by line, connection by connection, was a child's game he could wave off between cocktail parties. My breath caught, my chest tightened, rage surged hot and fast. But I locked it inside. I didn't turn. I didn't respond. The humiliation was already heavy enough without giving him my voice. Still, the silence felt heavier than any scream I could have unleashed. Inside. I wanted to claw back at him, to strip away his arrogance, to show the board who really carried this empire. But I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms. My body trembled, not from fear, but from the double weight of anger and exhaustion. The elevator doors closed, shielding me from his sneer, but the echo of his mockery clung to me like smoke. I pressed my hand against the railing inside, my knuckles pale. My reflection in the mirrored wall looked hollow, older than my years. I could see the toll of all the nights I had traded for loyalty. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, my face was composed again. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic glance, as if she knew, but I only nodded and walked on. Outside, the city air felt sharp, almost medicinal. I drew in a deep breath, wincing as my ribs ached again. My body reminded me of the truth. I was already breaking down, and Marcus Hale had just snapped the final thread that tethered me to this company. I walked toward the street without looking back. My silence was not weakness. It was a weapon waiting for the right moment. The glow of my apartment felt colder than usual that night. I had left the boardroom in silence, endured Carter's taunts, and now sat at my kitchen table, staring at the soft hum of my laptop. The city skyline blinked through the window, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on the dashboard I had logged into 1,000 times before. Only this time, something was different. Across the screen, in bold amber text, pulsed the message, "Authorization renewal pending." My breath caught. My system, the financial bridge protocol, was alive, demanding my presence as it always had, every 90 days. It required a biometric renewal from me, its original architect, before allowing the next cycle of transactions. It was a safeguard I had designed years ago, not out of arrogance, but necessity. I had seen too many shortcuts taken by executives who never understood the fragility of international finance. This checkpoint was meant to ensure the bridge could not be tampered with or stolen. And now, it was staring back at me, waiting. Without my renewal, the entire network would lock itself. No transfers, no settlements, no movement of funds across the 18 countries it connected. A system worth $14.2 billion in active flows would grind to a halt. My heart thudded in my chest. I leaned closer, hands trembling slightly over the keyboard. Doubt pressed in first. Could I really let it expire? Could I stand by and watch as banks, regulators, and entire economies were paralyzed by a system I had once proudly maintained? The responsibility weighed heavier than my humiliation. I remembered the faces of colleagues who had depended on me, the smaller firms that relied on timely transfers, the international teams who trusted the bridge. My silence at the board meeting had been one thing, but this was different. This was power, and then came fear. If I withheld my renewal, would they accuse me of sabotage? Would Marcus spin it as proof that I was unstable, bitter, incapable of professionalism? He had the voice, the media contacts, the charisma. I had the system, but I wasn't sure if that would be enough against his narrative. My gaze drifted down to the corner of the screen, where the clause identifier blinked. I clicked, pulling up the buried section of the agreement drafted years ago. There it was. In plain text, authorization renewal, architect biometric required, signed off by none other than Marcus Hale himself. My lips parted in disbelief. He had approved it. He had signed the clause without ever reading the fine print. My safeguard wasn't just a technical feature, it was a legal requirement, documented and binding, without my biometric confirmation. The system could not operate, and Marcus had sealed that truth with his own pen. A hollow laugh escaped me, short and sharp. He had handed me the lever of power without realizing it. And now, in his obsession with nepotism, he had pushed me out, leaving the company exposed to the very safeguard he had legitimized. Still, fear didn't let go. My illness weighed on me. What if I didn't have the strength to fight? What if legal battles dragged on and I couldn't endure them? I pressed a hand to my side, feeling the familiar ache pulse beneath my ribs. I had worked through pain for years, but this was different. This was bigger than me. I closed my eyes and thought of my mother's medication, my daughter's tuition, the bills stacked neatly on my counter. Every piece of my personal life was tied to this company. And yet, they had discarded me like waste. Now, the system I built was demanding my choice. Renew, and let them continue with Carter at the helm, or stay silent, and watch everything freeze. The message pulsed again. Authorization renewal pending. A countdown ticked softly in the corner, each second stretching into eternity. I could almost hear the hum of servers halfway across the world, waiting for my fingerprint, my approval, my yes. Without it, they would fall silent. For the first time in 19 years, Marcus Hale wasn't in control. Neither was Carter. The power sat here, in my dim apartment, glowing from a screen only I could command. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to use it. The next morning, Carter arrived on the operations floor like a king entering his court. He wore an expensive suit, ill-fitted, the sleeves brushing his knuckles, but he carried himself as though he had just been crowned. I wasn't there in person, but I heard every detail from colleagues who texted me in disbelief. The story spread like wildfire through back channels, the new head of global operations strutting through the nerve center of the financial bridge. He stopped at each desk, tossing out comments like coins to peasants. Looking sharp? People? He said with a grin, though he didn't know half their names. Relax. This system's basically just wires and code, right? How hard can it be? Those words made my stomach turn. Wires and code. That was how he saw it? As if the financial bridge was a toy circuit board instead of the lifeline that connected 18 countries, thousands of banks, and billions of dollars in active flow. Each rule, each line of protocol, was a knot I had tied to prevent collapse. To hear it reduced to wires and code was like watching a cathedral I had built being mocked as a pile of bricks. Bitterness welled inside me. For 19 years, I had carried this bridge across my shoulders. I had endured regulators' tempers, cross-border audits, emergencies at midnight. I had poured my body and health into keeping the system precise. And here was Carter, 26, barely able to explain the difference between net settlement and gross settlement, calling it simple. The staff humored him, nodding politely, but beneath the surface, they knew. They had worked under me long enough to understand the system's gravity. They knew Carter's ignorance could sink them all. Yet no one spoke up. Marcus's shadow loomed too large. Dissent carried consequences. So they swallowed their objections and watched the circus unfold. Later that afternoon, Carter hosted his first call with an international banking partner. The manager on the other end, a sharp regulator from Zurich, had one simple request: verification of a compliance term that was standard in every quarterly review. It wasn't a trick question. It was the kind of basic check my junior analysts could answer in their sleep. "Could you confirm the current liquidity offset ratio under your protocol?" the man asked. His tone professional, but expectant. There was a pause. A long one. Carter shifted in his chair, flipping through papers he didn't understand. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, we've got that covered. The ratio thing, totally within range." The banker frowned. "Within range? Could you be specific?" Carter laughed nervously. "Listen, buddy, I don't waste time with jargon. Bottom line, it's all green lights here. You know how it is. Wires and code." Silence crackled across the call. The banker's expression hardened. On the operations floor, employees glanced at one another, horrified. Some looked down at their keyboards to hide their reactions. Others flushed red, mortified. My phone buzzed a minute later with a message from a friend still inside. "He doesn't know the basics. We're doomed." I stared at the text, bitterness coating my mouth like ash. This was the man Marcus had chosen over me. This was the legacy of nepotism, arrogance without knowledge, charm without substance. Carter would play at leadership, but every mistake would land on the backs of those who had no voice. And I, the only one who truly knew the bridge, had been cast out. That night, I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker. Contempt burned hotter than the pain in my ribs. Carter's ignorance wasn't just laughable, it was dangerous. The bridge wasn't forgiving. It didn't bend for amateurs. One misstep, one overlooked detail, and billions could freeze in place. And in the quiet of my apartment, bitterness whispered a truth I could no longer ignore. Marcus had handed the empire to a fool, and fools don't just stumble. They fall, dragging everything with them. The cursor blinked at me like an impatient heartbeat. On my laptop screen, the dashboard of the financial bridge pulsed with the same amber warning I had seen the night before. Authorization renewal pending. The countdown ticked steadily in the corner, each second daring me to act. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to press a single key. For years, the system had recognized me as its anchor. It trusted my fingerprints, my eyes, my voice. It never doubted, never betrayed me. And now, here it was, waiting one last time for my confirmation, even though the company itself had thrown me out. I pressed a hand against my side, wincing at the pain that never fully left me anymore. The dull ache that had grown sharper in recent months made my hands tremble on the table. My doctor had warned me to rest, had practically begged me to step back from the stress. But I had ignored him, again and again, convincing myself that the system was bigger than my body. And now I wondered, had all that sacrifice been worth it? If Marcus could strip me of everything with a single announcement? A wave of rage surged through me, but I held it down, clamping it tight behind clenched teeth. My silence had always been my armor. In the boardroom, in the hallways, in the elevator, I had refused to scream, to beg, to give them the satisfaction of my voice cracking. But here, alone in my apartment, silence pressed heavier, more suffocating. I wanted to slam my hand against the keys, to force the system into lock mode and watch Marcus Hale's empire freeze in real time. But another part of me, quieter, more cautious, hesitated. Was I prepared for the chaos it would cause? For banks calling in panic? For headlines accusing me of sabotage? Could I carry the weight of being painted as the villain, even if the truth was on my side? My health was already fragile, my savings thin. If they came after me with lawyers and smear campaigns, would I survive it? My screen flickered with a new notification. An email slid into my inbox. Subject line sharp. Renewal confirmation required. My stomach clenched as I clicked. It wasn't from the company. It was from one of our most important banking partners in Singapore. We're waiting for your renewal, Ms. Rhodes. Please advise at your earliest convenience. The words made my chest tighten. They still believed I was in control. To them, Carter was a footnote, a placeholder. I was the bridge. Me. Their trust was still tethered to my name. Not Marcus's, not Carter's. For a moment, the anger I had been burying flared bright. Marcus had humiliated me in front of the board, but he couldn't erase the truth. The truth was written into every contract, every line of code, every foreign registry still listing my biometric as the sole gatekeeper. They could celebrate Carter with roses and applause, but the world outside these walls knew better. The world still needed me, yet the conflict raged inside. Should I answer the email? Should I reassure them? Play along as if I were still at the helm? Or should I stay silent and let the clock run down, forcing them to confront the reality Marcus had created for himself? My hand hovered over the keyboard, trembling with both pain and indecision. I thought of my mother's pills, the medical invoices stacked on my counter. I thought of my daughter, ready for college, her future tied to scholarships and whatever scraps I could provide. Renewal meant keeping the system alive for them, for their security, their stability. But renewal also meant keeping Marcus and Carter comfortable in the seats they had stolen from me. The bitterness was unbearable. I wanted justice. I wanted silence to be my weapon. Yet fear whispered, if you let it lock, you'll be blamed, hunted, destroyed. I closed my laptop with a snap and pressed my forehead to my folded hands. My body shook, not just from illness, but from the storm inside me. For 19 years, I had been the quiet backbone. Now my silence held more weight than all of Marcus Hale's words combined. And still, I said nothing. The ticking clock became my only companion. Each second stretched, deliberate, like the steady drip of water in a cavern. I sat at my desk with the laptop open, the amber warning pulsing at the corner of the screen. Authorization renewal pending. The countdown slid toward 0, quiet and merciless. My fingers stayed folded in my lap. I didn't type. I didn't move. For 19 years, I had carried the burden of reacting, racing to fix, to patch, to prevent collapse before anyone noticed. But tonight, I allowed myself the opposite. I allowed stillness. Let Marcus boast. Let Carter swagger. The bridge did not recognize them. It recognized me. And without my renewal, it would obey only one command: silence. When the final second blinked away, the screen shifted. The amber message dissolved into red. Authorization expired. Access denied. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. My hands stayed steady on the table, even as my pulse quickened beneath the surface. The system had locked. On the other side of the world, London's markets stirred awake. It was 9 o'clock in the morning there when the first transfer failed. A corporate settlement froze midstream, flagged with a blunt error code. The bankers frowned, retried, frowned harder. Within minutes, more transactions stacked like cars in a traffic jam, screens lit with red, the bridge clamping down exactly as it had been designed to do. Dominoes began to fall. By the time Zurich opened, the block had spread like a contagion. Hong Kong traders, watching London's failure, grew restless. Frankfurt regulators demanded explanations that no one at Hale International could give. Every country connected to the bridge felt the tremor. The silence of halted transfers echoed louder than any alarm. I watched it unfold on my private dashboard. Transactions blinked red, one after another. The system I had nurtured turning rigid, unyielding, and still. I remained calm. Rage would have been too easy. Gloating would have diminished the gravity of what was happening. Instead, I let a cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't vengeance for its own sake. It was justice by design, justice written into the very code Marcus had once signed without reading. Messages began pouring into my personal inbox. Not from Marcus, not yet, but from foreign banks, their tones urgent, panicked. Ms. Rhodes, please confirm renewal. Our transfers are stalled. Are you available for override? They bypassed the company entirely, reaching out to me, because in their eyes, I was still the bridge. I didn't respond. Silence was my answer. I imagined Marcus at headquarters, his voice rising as staff scrambled. Carter would be beside him, bluffing about technical glitches, trying to look in control while not even understanding the acronyms on the screens. The thought should have brought satisfaction. Instead, I felt a deeper, heavier calm. Their panic was inevitable. Their downfall was already scripted. All I had to do was nothing. By mid-morning in Europe, the financial press caught wind. Headlines flashed. London transfers frozen. Hail protocol failure suspected. Traders whispered of contagion risk. Hashtags started appearing. Speculation spilling faster than the markets could handle. And still, the bridge held its silence, waiting for a voice that would never come. I leaned back in my chair, letting the glow of the screen wash over me. My body ached, illness gnawing at my ribs. But for once, I didn't fight it. The pain was proof of what I had given, proof of every hour I had poured into a system now standing as my unspoken witness. This wasn't an act of fury. It was the absence of action. I hadn't slammed doors or shouted in boardrooms. I hadn't sabotaged their machines. I had simply withheld what was mine, what had always been mine. And in that withholding, empires trembled. By noon in London, the crisis was no longer containable. Regulators demanded emergency calls. Banks held meetings behind closed doors. Stock prices wavered. And somewhere across the city skyline, Marcus Hale surely realized the truth, that he had celebrated too soon, placed flowers in the wrong hands, and mocked the wrong woman. The first domino had fallen in London. The rest of the world would follow. The operations center was a hive of panic. Screens glowed red across the floor. Alarms beeped in uneven patterns, and the low murmur of staff swelled into frantic chatter. Marcus Hale stood in the middle, like a general in the middle of a collapsing battlefield, his voice booming over the chaos. "Get it back online, now! I don't care what it takes, fix it!" he roared, slamming his fist against a console so hard the younger analysts flinched. Technicians scrambled, sweat beading on their foreheads as they combed through code and server logs. The bridge's collapse wasn't just a glitch, it was a system-wide freeze. Every minute that ticked by cost millions. Banks in London and Zurich were calling nonstop, their demands growing sharper, their voices less patient. Carter hovered nearby, pale but trying desperately to look in charge. He clapped his hands once, grinning wide, pretending to radiate confidence. "Relax, people," he said. "It's just wires and code. I know Mia made this whole thing dramatic, but it's not rocket science. We'll have it back up in no time." But no one laughed. No one looked reassured. They all knew better. They had worked under me long enough to understand the bridge wasn't something that bent easily. Still, they threw themselves at the task, patching, rebooting, overriding, anything to satisfy Marcus's fury. Hours dragged by. The room reeked of coffee and desperation. Finally, near midnight, a senior engineer lifted his head from his console and shouted, "It's responding. Restart complete. The bridge is online." A collective exhale swept through the room. Lights on the dashboards flickered from red to green. Transactions began flowing again in short bursts. The frozen settlements in London cleared. Zurich followed, and even Hong Kong's pending queues showed signs of life. The staff slumped back in their chairs, relief breaking across their faces. Carter threw both arms into the air, as though he had just scored a touchdown. "See? What did I tell you? Piece of cake!" He spun in a circle, soaking in the moment, tossing high fives at engineers who barely raised their hands. "I told you we'd get it! All that panic for nothing!" Marcus let out a breath through gritted teeth, his jaw still tight, but his shoulders easing slightly. He turned to his board liaison on the phone, barking, "Tell them we're back. Tell them the Hale dynasty holds steady. No system can keep us down." For a fleeting moment, the room buzzed with shaky triumph. Staff allowed themselves to hope the storm had passed, that maybe they could finally go home, sleep, and pretend the worst was behind them. The sense of survival hung thick in the air. Then, without warning, every screen froze. The green lights blinked once, twice, then collapsed back into red. A harsh tone filled the room, louder and more insistent than before, across every monitor. A new message appeared in unyielding block letters. "Secondary lock engaged. Authorization required." The room went silent. Fingers hovered above keyboards. Eyes widened. The relief that had barely settled was ripped away in an instant, replaced by fresh terror. "What the hell is that?" Marcus barked, his voice cracking with something close to fear. The senior engineer swallowed hard. "Sir, there's another layer. We didn't know." Carter's grin faltered. "Another lock?" No. We fixed it. It was fine. We just fixed it." He spun toward the screen, pointing as if shouting at the message could make it disappear. "This isn't fair. It's not supposed to do that." But it did. It was designed to. The bridge had multiple layers of protection, each one triggered if the previous was bypassed. And only I knew them all. I had built them for this exact reason, to ensure no executive could ever seize control without me. Carter could celebrate all he wanted. Marcus could roar until his throat burned, but the system would not bow. I watched the same red message appear on my private dashboard. My face stayed calm, my hands steady. Relief, chaos, hope, collapse. It all played out exactly as I had known it would. In their desperation, they had thought victory was theirs, but they had only cleared the first gate. The real locks had just begun. By dawn the next morning, panic was no longer confined to the operations center. It had spilled into the world. News anchors in London led with grim urgency. $14.2 billion frozen overnight. 18 nations reporting blocked transfers. Hale International at the center of a potential global crisis. Within hours, the headlines multiplied. Hale collapse. Banks across Europe halted. World economy ripple from frozen protocol. Traders posted screenshots of error messages. Furious small business owners shared videos of empty dashboards. And analysts speculated about the domino effect of stalled settlements. The image of Marcus Hale, once the poster boy of bold innovation, now filled screens beside words like negligence and incompetence. Stock tickers scrolled red. Investors scrambled to pull out of anything tied to the Hale family. Fear spread faster than fact. Inside headquarters, fear had already transformed into exposure. Carter sat hunched at a console, his bravado stripped away. Gone was the cocky grin, replaced by sweat on his temple and frantic typing that led nowhere. Marcus paced behind him, phone glued to his ear, his voice hoarse from yelling at regulators who demanded answers he could not give. But the most devastating blow came not from banks, not from investors, but from a journalist. It began with a leaked document posted by a financial reporter in Singapore. She had combed through international banking registries and found something the company could not bury. The name Mia Rhodes, listed in bold as the primary verifier of the Financial Bridge Protocol. Screenshots of the registry went viral within minutes. The headline read, "Bridge still belongs to Mia Rhodes." It hit like a lightning strike. If I was still the official verifier. Then Marcus's claims of technical glitches, were a lie. If Carter was truly in charge, why was my biometric the one international regulator still recognized? The narrative turned sharp. Brutal. Anchors grilled the company's spokespeople live on air. Why is Ms. Rhodes still listed as the primary verifier? Was she removed legally, or was this an internal coup? Did Hale International knowingly hide her role from investors? No answer satisfied. Every denial sounded weaker than the last. The press smelled blood, and they circled. I sat in my apartment, watching the chaos unfold across my television. The sound of my name repeated again and again felt surreal. Mia Rhodes, primary verifier, former architect. The world was speaking of me as if I had never left, as if my dismissal in the boardroom had been nothing but an illusion. Fear clawed at me, sharp and insistent. Exposure meant power, but it also meant risk. If Marcus painted me as the saboteur, the headlines could turn. If the board decided to make me the scapegoat, I could face lawsuits, investigations, even ruin. The weight of that possibility pressed heavy on my chest. And yet, beneath the fear, something colder stirred. The exposure cut both ways. Marcus couldn't hide anymore. Carter couldn't pretend. The world had seen the truth in black and white. The bridge recognized me and no one else. Their empire was unraveling, and I hadn't even spoken a word. Back at headquarters, Carter slammed a fist against his desk, shouting at staff to fix the optics. But optics couldn't erase registries. Marcus tried to bark over the noise, but even his voice faltered when a reporter cornered him outside the lobby with a microphone. "Mr. Hale, why is your former employee still the legal verifier of your global system?" He froze. Cameras caught the hesitation, the split second of fear in his eyes. The footage looped endlessly across channels. By evening, the company's stock had dropped 20%. Board members were whispering of resignation votes, and across 18 countries. Ordinary people repeated the same question: who really controls the bridge? I didn't have to answer. The registry already had. The fallout arrived faster than even I imagined. By sunrise, the bridge had become the center of a global standoff. Banks across Europe and Asia sent out identical bulletins. No transaction will be cleared without official verification from primary verifier, Mia Rhodes. For years, I had been invisible, a technician in the shadows, the architect behind the curtain. Now my name was stamped across every refusal notice, every stalled settlement. It was surreal to watch entire nations halt because I had not lifted a finger. In London, a banking consortium refused to release billions in overnight transfers. In Frankfurt, regulators suspended all new settlements until they received written assurance that my biometric had been renewed. Tokyo went further, issuing a statement that any transaction processed without my oversight would be deemed invalid under international banking law. Fear turned quickly into exposure, and exposure hardened into rejection. Marcus Hale could no longer bluff his way through press conferences, and Carter could no longer grin his way through incompetence. The world had made its choice, and it wasn't them. At headquarters, chaos reigned. Staff whispered that Marcus had locked himself in his office with lawyers, trying to draft statements that sounded like control when everyone knew it was collapse. Carter stormed through the operations floor, snapping at employees, demanding loyalty. But their eyes betrayed them. They no longer believed. Then came the twist that sealed their fate. A major Asian financial conglomerate, controlling nearly $3 billion in assets tied to the bridge, issued a public statement broadcast worldwide. Their chairman, calm and deliberate, faced the cameras. For the stability of global markets, we will only trust Mia Rhodes as verifier of the financial bridge protocol. Without her, we consider all transfers suspended indefinitely. The impact was immediate. Reporters repeated the words like a hammer blow. We will only trust Mia Rhodes. Stock tickers bled red. Hale International's shares plummeted in real time. dropping by double digits within minutes of the announcement. By the end of the trading day, the company had lost nearly half its market value. Headlines screamed of a dynasty in freefall. From my apartment, I watched it unfold in silence. Vindication pulsed through me, not in fiery triumph, but in a slow, steady warmth. For years, I had been treated as replaceable, invisible, yet here were the most powerful institutions in the world acknowledging, publicly, that the system depended on me, and only me. Still, I couldn't ignore the knot of emotion twisting in my chest. It wasn't just victory, it was recognition. For every night I had skipped meals, for every warning from doctors I had ignored, for every moment I had wondered if my sacrifices even mattered, here was proof. The world had noticed. My work had weight. Marcus tried to respond with bravado. Cameras caught him outside headquarters, flanked by security, shouting, "We are in full control. Do not listen to rumors." But his words sounded hollow, drowned out by the reality of frozen accounts and plummeting stock. Carter, on the other hand, lashed out recklessly. On a leaked conference call, he accused international partners of overreacting and called the bridge just a bunch of wires. The recording spread online, igniting outrage and ridicule. Traders joked that Hale International had put a nightclub promoter in charge of the global economy. Each word they spoke tightened the noose. Each denial, each insult, pushed the world further toward me. I sat by the window, the city lights stretching into the distance, my laptop glowing beside me. The messages kept pouring in, pleas from banks, from regulators, from former colleagues begging me to intervene. I read them all, but I didn't reply. Not yet. Silence was still my sharpest weapon. For the first time since that humiliating morning in the boardroom, I felt the balance shift. The scales that had crushed me were tipping back, piece by piece, and as Hale International crumbled under the weight of rejection, I allowed myself a quiet thought. Justice didn't always come with noise. Sometimes, justice arrived in the stillness of waiting, and the world refusing to move without you. The walls of the operations center had absorbed days of panic, but by now the air inside felt poisonous. Reports piled higher by the hour, transactions stalled in Frankfurt, Tokyo threatening legal action, and investors demanding Marcus Hale's resignation. Still, Carter planted himself in the middle of it all, sweat glistening on his temples, his voice shrill and cracking as he barked orders no one believed in. "Run it again!" he shouted, slamming his palm on a console. "Reboot the damn thing! You're just not trying hard enough!" The engineers exchanged wary glances. They had already rebooted half a dozen times. The bridge wasn't a light switch. It was a living system with multiple protective layers. Every attempt to bypass it only triggered deeper locks. They knew this. Carter did not. His desperation turned cruel. "You think I don't see it?" he yelled at a young analyst who hesitated before typing a command. "You're stalling. You're loyal to her, aren't you? You're protecting Mia. Admit it." The analyst's face flushed, eyes wide. "No, sir. I'm just trying to—" "Shut up!" Carter snapped, pointing a finger inches from the man's face. "You're all conspiring against me. This is sabotage. And you're letting her get away with it." The room went silent. No one dared breathe too loudly. Marcus had always been harsh, but his nephew's outbursts carried a different flavor. Immature, desperate, almost childish. And unlike Marcus, Carter lacked authority. Every insult chipped away at whatever scraps of respect his title had left. By evening, Carter's paranoia had spiraled. He stormed from desk to desk, demanding loyalty pledges, accusing staff of leaking information, even threatening to fire half the team. But his voice trembled. His eyes darted like a cornered animal. He knew the empire was slipping from his hands, and he didn't know how to stop it. The breaking point came in a meeting hastily convened with senior staff. Carter paced the front of the room, gesturing wildly at the red warnings on the giant screens. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "It's just stupid wires. A bunch of useless code. We don't need her. We don't need Mia. Anyone with half a brain could keep this thing running if you people weren't so lazy." Several staff froze. Phones had been recording, silently, secretly, his words, dripping with arrogance and contempt, captured in crisp audio. Within hours, the recording leaked. The clip went viral overnight. Carter Rhodes. "It's just stupid wires." News anchors played it on repeat, their voices laced with disbelief. Analysts shook their heads. Social media erupted in ridicule. Memes flooded timelines. Carter's face pasted over tangled extension cords. Captions mocking him as the wire whisperer. Even international partners, once formal in their outrage, now treated the company like a laughingstock. A Tokyo banker commented bluntly to reporters, "If the man in charge thinks the bridge is stupid wires, then the Hale dynasty is finished." From my apartment, I watched the fallout unfold. My lips tightened, but I did not smile. It wasn't joy I felt, it was confirmation. Every insult he hurled, every careless word, revealed to the world what I had always known. Their empire had been built on arrogance, not competence. Back at headquarters, desperation curdled into chaos. Marcus slammed doors and cursed at advisors. Carter, now the butt of global jokes, hid in his office, refusing calls, lashing out at anyone who knocked. The once polished dynasty had unraveled into farce, its credibility shredded not just by failure, but by ridicule. And the bridge remained silent, waiting. The call came late in the evening, long after the city had gone quiet. My phone buzzed across the kitchen counter, the number flashing unfamiliar. I almost ignored it, but something in me already knew. When I answered, the voice on the other end was stripped of its usual bravado. Marcus Hale, once thunderous and commanding, sounded like a man drowning. "Mia," he said, his breath ragged. "We need to talk." I let the silence stretch, savoring the reversal. Once, he had reduced me to silence in front of the board. Now, he stumbled through it himself. "We can't move forward without you," he admitted. "The regulators, the banks, they won't listen to anyone else. You know the system better than anyone. I'll make it worth your while. Name your price." I sat at my table, hands folded, eyes steady on the laptop screen, still glowing with the frozen dashboard. Calm washed over me, colder than anger, sharper than triumph. For weeks, I had carried humiliation, pain, and fury in my chest. But tonight, all of that had melted into something simpler. Clarity. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not coming back." The line went silent. For a moment, I thought he had hung up. Then his voice cracked again. "Mia, listen to me. The board is restless. The stock is in freefall. Carter has become a global embarrassment. If you don't help, the company will collapse." I closed my eyes, picturing the bouquet of roses he had placed in front of Carter. The smirk, the mockery. My health sacrificed, my loyalty discarded. He had chosen nepotism over competence, arrogance over truth. And now the cost had come due. "That's not my problem," I replied, my tone even, deliberate. "You built this collapse with your own hands." For the first time, Marcus Hale had no rebuttal. He stammered, then muttered something about family and legacy, but the words rang hollow. I ended the call before he could continue. The next morning, the news broke. The board, under pressure from furious shareholders, demanded Marcus cover immediate damages through his personal fortune, with lawsuits looming from international partners. The company's insurance refused to pay, citing negligence, misrepresentation, and lack of disclosure. The dynasty that Marcus had paraded for decades was suddenly exposed for what it was. Hollow. Headlines blared across every network. Hale family forced to pay out of pocket. The failed Nepotism dynasty. From power to ruin, Hale empire crumbles. Footage of Marcus walking out of the headquarters circulated widely. His once tailored suits now hung loose, his face gray, his shoulders bent beneath the weight of disgrace. Reporters shouted questions as he pushed through the crowd. But the only sound that mattered was the chant echoing online and in print. The failed Nepotism dynasty. Carter didn't appear beside him. Rumors spread that he had retreated overseas, hiding from the spotlight, too humiliated to face the world after the stupid wires debacle. His name had become shorthand for incompetence, his photograph a meme plastered across the internet. I watched it all unfold with the calm detachment of someone who had already let go. Vindication was no longer a wave of fury crashing against me. It was a steady river, carrying the Hale family toward the reckoning they had earned. For 19 years. I had carried them on my shoulders. For 19 years. I had sacrificed my health, my time, my life. And for what? For flowers handed to someone else. For laughter at my expense. Now. The balance had shifted. The world saw them clearly. They weren't a dynasty, they were a cautionary tale. I closed my laptop. The hum of the city outside whispering against my window. Calm authority pulsed through me, deeper than triumph, stronger than revenge. For the first time in years, I felt no need to prove myself. The truth had done it for me. The pen felt surprisingly light in my hand. After weeks of chaos, humiliation, and silence. This moment arrived not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty. I signed my name on the final page of the contract, the ink settling into the paper like a seal on a new life. Across the desk, the representative of Orion Capital smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Rhodes, Senior Operations Advisor. Your expertise will give us stability others can only dream of." His tone carried no arrogance, no empty flattery, only respect, real respect, the kind I had craved for years and never received from Marcus Hale. The terms were more than generous, a salary triple what I'd ever earned, enough to cover every medical treatment I needed without fear, enough to ensure my mother's prescriptions were always filled, her care uninterrupted, enough to send my daughter to college without the weight of debt pressing on her shoulders. Security. At last, security earned through sacrifice, and finally recognized. As I rose from the chair, the air felt lighter in my lungs. For 19 years, I had bent myself into silence, burying pain, swallowing anger. Now, silence was no longer a cage. It was power. Later. I stood by the wide glass window of my new office, the skyline stretching endlessly before me. Sunlight reflected off the towers, bright and merciless, as if the city itself bore witness to what had been lost and what had been gained. On the mounted television, financial news scrolled across the ticker. My gaze caught on the headline flashing in bold letters, "Hale Dynasty Collapse, Legacy Erased." The camera showed Marcus pushing through a mob of reporters, his once impeccable image shredded. Carter was nowhere to be seen. Their empire had crumbled, not with explosions or lawsuits alone, but with silence. The silence of a system that refused to obey them. The silence of a woman they thought disposable. I felt no need to smile, no urge to gloat. The vindication was deeper, calmer. They had written my erasure in roses and applause for a lazy air. I had answered with nothing but absence, and absence had spoken louder than any protest could. The world saw them for what they were. And it saw me, not as a victim, not as a shadow, but as the quiet force behind the bridge that had held 18 nations steady until arrogance toppled it. I rested my hand against the glass, my reflection steady in the light. I didn't fight, I didn't shout, I only stepped aside, and the silence of falling dominoes became my justice. Stories like this remind us that silence can be stronger than shouting, and that dignity outlasts arrogance. If Mia's journey moved you, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration, And subscribe so you never miss another story of resilience and justice.